Hong Kong, 1970. The arena didn't look large from the outside, but inside it felt compressed by heat, noise, and expectation. Nearly 2,000 people filled the seats, their voices blending into a low, constant roar. Cigarette smoke hovered beneath the ceiling lights, and the canvas of the boxing ring was already darkened by sweat. Bruce Lee stood in his corner without moving. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't stretching. He wasn't looking at the crowd. His breathing was slow, deliberate, almost meditative. To those who didn't know him, he looked small, lean, compact, quiet. To those who did, that stillness was familiar. It was how he always was before movement, before expression. Across the ring stood his opponent, an American boxer. Taller, heavier, broad-shouldered, confident in a way that bordered on careless. He played to the crowd, rolling his neck, bouncing lightly on his feet, smiling as if this were already decided. The bell rang. The first round unfolded cautiously. Bruce Lee moved lightly, testing distance, reading rhythm. He didn't rush. He never did. The American pressed forward, using reach and weight, landing enough clean touches to sway the judges. Nothing devastating, but enough to claim the round. When the bell rang again, signaling the break, the crowd murmured. Some cheered, some whispered, some doubted. Bruce Lee returned to his corner, expression unchanged. That was when it happened. Instead of walking straight back, the American boxer drifted toward the edge of the ring. Near the post lay a small Chinese flag, placed there earlier by organizers, a quiet symbol easily overlooked. The boxer looked down. Then he bent, picked it up, tossed it onto the canvas, and planted his boot squarely on it. Not accidentally, not playfully, deliberately. Laughter rippled through part of the crowd. Others gasped. Some stood up without realizing it. Bruce Lee saw everything. He did not shout. He did not react. But something behind his eyes changed. For the first time that night, he stepped forward before the bell rang. And the arena, without knowing why, fell into a silence heavier than noise. The referee hadn't seen it at first. He was busy checking the timer, glancing toward the judge's table, listening to someone shout from ringside. The American boxer kept his boot on the flag an extra beat, just long enough for the message to land, then stepped away like it meant nothing. Bruce Lee didn't look at the flag. He looked at the man, not with anger, not with emotion, with something quieter and far more dangerous. A clean, unwavering decision. In his corner, his trainer started talking fast, advice, strategy, warnings. Bruce barely seemed to hear. His chest rose and fell once, slow and controlled. He rolled his shoulders, loosened his hands, and took one step forward. Then another. Across from him, the American boxer grinned, enjoying the tension he'd created. He wanted Bruce Lee rattled. He wanted him rushed, reckless, sloppy. He wanted a mistake. The bell rang. Bruce Lee moved first. Not in a wide arc. Not in a dance. He closed distance like a door slamming shut. Sudden, direct, irreversible. The American's smile faltered as he realized the pace had changed. The rhythm wasn't boxing anymore. It was pressure. Bruce didn't chase the head right away. He took space. He took balance. A sharp entry. A quick angle. A strike that landed with a sound that didn't match his size. The American boxer stepped back, surprised, then tried to answer with a jab. Bruce slipped outside it, not dramatically, just efficiently, and returned something short and compact that forced the man to reset his stance. The crowd's noise changed. Less chatter. More intake of breath. The American tried to bully forward, throwing weight into the ring like it could crush technique. But Bruce Lee didn't meet force with force. He met it with timing, arriving just ahead of the moment, cutting the path, turning the bigger body into a disadvantage. Another exchange. Another sharp impact. The American's eyes widened. His confidence didn't vanish, but it cracked. He began to realize he wasn't facing a performer. He was facing a craftsman. Someone who didn't need to look brutal to be brutal. Bruce's face stayed calm, almost blank. But his movement carried a different intention now. Every step was tighter. Every strike was placed as if it mattered more than points. At ringside, a man whispered, barely audible, "He's not fighting to win. He's fighting to punish." Then the American boxer made the second mistake. He glanced down at the flag again like the whole thing was still funny. Bruce Lee saw that glance. And in that instant, he stopped holding anything back. The next combination came like a sudden storm. Clean, fast, and impossible to fully track. The referee stepped closer. Because even he could feel it. This wasn't a match anymore. It was a warning. The American boxer tried to regain control. He widened his stance, raised his guard higher, and began throwing heavier shots. Less precise, more forceful. The kind of punches meant to remind everyone who was bigger, who was supposed to dominate. One of them grazed Bruce Lee's shoulder. Another brushed past his cheek. The crowd reacted loudly. But Bruce Lee didn't. He adjusted. Half a step. A subtle shift of weight. His feet stayed light, but his center felt anchored, like the floor itself had agreed to work with him. Every time the American advanced, Bruce met him just off-center, never where the punch expected him to be. A sharp counter landed to the body. Not dramatic, not flashy, but deep. The American's breath caught for a fraction of a second. He didn't show it, but his timing slipped. Just enough. Bruce noticed. That was the difference. He pressed forward again, cutting the ring smaller and smaller. The American's back touched the ropes, and suddenly the space he'd relied on was gone. The crowd was on its feet now, shouting in bursts. Some cheering, some warning, some pleading. The referee circled closer, eyes darting between their hands, their feet, their faces. He sensed escalation, but nothing yet justified a stoppage. Then Bruce Lee struck again. This time there was no pause afterward, no reset. One movement flowed into the next. Each strike placed with purpose, each opening exploited instantly. It wasn't rage. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity. The American boxer swung back hard, desperate to break the rhythm. Bruce stepped inside the arc of the punch and answered with something so compact it barely looked like effort. The sound was wrong. Not the sharp crack of gloves. Not the dull thud of a miss. Something heavier. The American staggered sideways, catching himself on the ropes. His eyes searched the ring, unfocused for a heartbeat longer than they should have been. The referee stepped in closer now, hand half raised. Bruce Lee didn't chase recklessly. He measured. He waited just long enough to make it clear. He could end this whenever he chose. For the first time, the American boxer looked uncertain. Not afraid, but aware. Aware that he had crossed a line he didn't understand. Aware that the man in front of him was no longer demonstrating skill. He was enforcing a boundary. The bell rang, ending the round. The arena erupted. Bruce Lee turned away immediately, walking back to his corner without looking at the crowd, without acknowledging the noise. His breathing was steady, his face unreadable, but those close enough noticed something unsettling. His hands were still tense, as if the fight, for him, wasn't over yet. And as the American boxer sat heavily on his stool, chest heaving, a thought crept into his mind for the first time that night. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about surviving what came next. The American boxer didn't stand right away when the bell ended the round. He stayed seated, elbows on his knees, staring at the canvas as if trying to understand it. His trainer leaned in close, talking fast, voice sharp with urgency. Instructions, adjustments, warnings. The kind of talk meant to pull a fighter back from the edge. Use your reach. Don't let him inside. Slow it down. The boxer nodded once, but his eyes kept drifting. Not to Bruce Lee, but to the space between them. The distance that had vanished so quickly. The distance he could no longer control. Across the ring, Bruce Lee sat calmly on his stool. Someone dabbed sweat from his face. Someone else murmured advice. He barely responded. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, not aggressive, not defiant, simply attentive, like a man watching the surface of still water, aware of everything moving beneath it. Inside him, something had shifted. He wasn't angry. That was the strange part. Anger burned hot and faded fast. What he felt now was colder, sharper, a deliberate narrowing of purpose, the kind that didn't ask questions. He remembered the flag, not as an object but as a moment, a choice, a signal sent with a boot and a smile. The bell rang again. The American boxer stood this time slower than before. He rolled his shoulders, lifted his gloves, forced a grin toward the crowd. But it didn't reach his eyes. Bruce Lee rose smoothly, stepping forward without hesitation. The fourth round began. This time Bruce didn't wait to read. He already had. He advanced immediately, taking away space, forcing the American to react instead of initiate. The bigger man tried to circle, but Bruce cut him off with footwork so subtle it almost went unnoticed, until there was nowhere left to go. A jab came out of desperation. Bruce slipped inside it. The counter landed clean. The crowd gasped as one. The American's legs held, but barely. His breathing grew louder, ragged, no longer controlled. Every exchange cost him more than the last. And Bruce Lee, still calm, still precise, seemed to be spending nothing at all. The referee's eyes never left them now. He had seen tough fights before, brutal ones, but this felt different. Not wild, not reckless, intentional. Bruce Lee stepped in again, closer than before, close enough to feel his opponent's breath. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. The American understood then. This wasn't personal rage. It was consequence. And consequences, once in motion, didn't stop easily. The American boxer tried to clinch. It was instinct. Muscle memory kicking in when options ran out. He stepped forward, arms widening, hoping to tie Bruce up, to stall the momentum, to buy time. For a moment it almost worked. Almost. Bruce Lee shifted his hips and slipped out before the grip could settle. The movement was so efficient it looked rehearsed, as if he had anticipated the attempt long before it happened. He didn't retreat. He stayed close. Too close. The American's breath came fast now, chest rising and falling like a bellows. Sweat ran into his eyes, blurring the lights, the crowd, the shape of the man in front of him. He threw a wide hook, more frustration than strategy. Bruce stepped inside the arc again. This time, the response wasn't a single strike. It was a sequence, short, direct, unbroken. Each movement flowed into the next with unsettling smoothness. Not rushed, not forced. The kind of motion that came from years of stripping away everything unnecessary. The sound of impact echoed through the arena. The American stumbled backward, catching the ropes again. His gloves came up late. His feet lagged behind his intent. For the first time, his body and his will were no longer aligned. The crowd was no longer cheering in bursts. They were shouting continuously now, voices overlapping, some urging Bruce on, others begging the referee to step in. Even those who didn't understand technique could feel it. Something irreversible was unfolding. The referee moved closer, hand raised higher this time, eyes scanning for a clean opening to stop it. Bruce Lee saw him, and for a fraction of a second he hesitated. Not because he was tired, not because he was unsure, because he understood exactly how far he could go. That moment of awareness, brief as a blink, was the line. The line between expression and excess, between making a point and making a mistake. The American boxer lunged again, desperate, off balance. Bruce answered once more, sharply, decisively. The referee stepped between them immediately. That's enough. He pushed Bruce back, signaling the stoppage with both arms. The bell rang again, louder than before, cutting through the noise like a blade. It was over. Bruce Lee stepped away without protest, without argument. He nodded once, acknowledging the decision, then turned toward his corner. Behind him, the American boxer sank to one knee, hands on the canvas, breathing hard but conscious. Trainers rushed in. The crowd erupted, relief mixing with awe. Bruce didn't look back. As he wiped his gloves and walked toward the edge of the ring, a strange quiet settled over him. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just clarity. He had crossed the line and stepped back in time. and everyone in that arena knew they had witnessed something they wouldn't forget. The noise didn't stop when the fight did. People were still standing, shouting, arguing, replaying the final moments with their hands and voices. Some cheered Bruce Lee's name. Others stared at the ring in silence, trying to process what they had just seen. The energy in the arena lingered, heavy and electric, like air after a lightning strike. Bruce Lee sat on his stool again, calm as ever. Someone placed a towel over his shoulders. Another handed him water. He took a small sip, then set the bottle down untouched. His breathing had already slowed. His pulse, if you could see it, would have told a story very different from the chaos around him. Across the ring, the American boxer was helped to his feet. He wasn't injured badly, not broken, not unconscious, but shaken in a way that couldn't be seen on the surface. His trainer spoke quietly to him now, no longer barking instructions. The boxer nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on Bruce Lee, following him with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect. He understood something now. This hadn't been about nationality alone, or pride, or ego. It had been about boundaries. Officials moved quickly to clear the ring. The small Chinese flag had been picked up and removed without ceremony, folded away as if it had never been there. But its presence still hung in the minds of those who'd seen what happened. Backstage, Bruce Lee walked through a narrow corridor lined with concrete walls and flickering lights. The noise faded behind him with every step. His footsteps were light, measured, almost soundless. A promoter caught up to him, breathless, speaking excitedly about headlines, about controversy, about attention. Bruce listened politely, nodded once, then kept walking. He wasn't thinking about the crowd. He wasn't thinking about the boxer. He was thinking about control. About how thin the margin was between discipline and destruction. About how easily skill, when paired with intent, could become something else entirely. Later, when a friend asked him if he'd lost his temper, Bruce shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I chose not to hide." That answer unsettled more people than anger ever could. Because anger fades, but choice remains. And that night, Bruce Lee had chosen to show exactly how dangerous restraint could be. By the next morning, the story had already changed. In tea houses, gyms, and crowded street corners, people argued over details that no one could fully agree on. Some said the American boxer had been arrogant from the start. Others claimed it was just showmanship gone wrong. A few insisted Bruce Lee had gone too far. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something unusual had happened in that ring. Newspapers picked it up cautiously. The language was careful, restrained. Intense bout. Controversial moment. Early stoppage. There were no words yet for what people actually felt. No headline could quite capture the shift that had taken place. Backstage, fighters who had watched from the shadows spoke in lowered voices. Men who had spent years testing each other's toughness now looked at Bruce Lee differently. Not as a performer, not as a novelty, but as a variable they hadn't accounted for. One of them said quietly, "He wasn't trying to prove he was better." Another replied, "No, he was proving he didn't need to." Bruce Lee himself avoided the attention. He left Hong Kong shortly after, slipping back into routine, training, teaching, refining ideas that lived more in his mind than in any ring. But the fight followed him anyway, carried by memory and exaggeration. Each retelling added something. The pause before the bell, the look in his eyes, the moment the referee stepped in. By the time it reached Los Angeles, the story had grown teeth. Some claimed Bruce had held back until insult forced his hand. Others whispered that what people saw was only a fraction of what he was capable of. Bruce rarely commented. When asked directly, he would smile faintly and say, "People see what they're ready to see." But late at night, alone in training halls, he replayed the moment. Not the strikes, not the crowd, but the hesitation. That brief instant where he had recognized the edge and chosen not to cross it. That decision mattered to him more than the fight itself. Because power, once revealed, could never be unseen. And Bruce Lee understood something most never did. The real danger wasn't what happened in the ring. It was what people would believe was possible after. In the weeks that followed, the questions came quietly. They weren't shouted across rooms or thrown by reporters with notebooks. They came in the form of invitations that were never sent, challenges that were never spoken aloud, and glances that lingered a second too long in training halls. Bruce Lee noticed all of it. At a small gym in Los Angeles, a young fighter stopped mid-workout when Bruce entered. The room didn't freeze, but it shifted. Conversations lowered. Movements tightened. Respect rearranged itself without being asked. No one mentioned Hong Kong. They didn't have to. Bruce trained as he always had. Alone at first, then with a small circle of students who watched more than they spoke. He moved through forms not as routines, but as questions. Each motion asked something of the body, demanded an answer from balance, timing, intention. Between rounds on the heavy bag, he paused longer than usual. Not from fatigue, from reflection. He thought about how easily the fight had crossed from expression into enforcement. How thin the line really was. How most people mistook restraint for weakness. Until they didn't. One night, after the gym had emptied, a student finally asked what everyone else had been thinking. Was it hard to stop? Bruce wiped his hands, considering the question carefully. No, he said. What's hard is knowing when stopping matters. The student didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Outside, the city moved on: cars, lights, noise, ambition. Inside the gym, something quieter settled into place. A shared understanding that what they were practicing wasn't just fighting. It was responsibility. Bruce Lee returned to his training, refining ideas that would later be called philosophy, though to him they were simply truths earned through experience. Be formless. Be adaptable. Know yourself. And above all, control yourself. The Hong Kong fight faded from headlines, then from memory, then into something less precise and more powerful. Legend. Stripped of details, sharpened by repetition, carried by implication rather than fact. Bruce knew how that worked. He also knew legends were dangerous, because they tempted people to test them. And sooner or later, someone always tried. Time passed, but the silence left behind by that fight never fully lifted. Bruce Lee felt it most when people thought he wasn't watching. In the way conversations shifted when he entered a room. In the way challengers spoke loudly about skill and tradition, then quietly backed away from direct confrontation. In the way respect now carried a trace of caution. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Bruce understood that too. At home, late at night, he trained alone. No mirrors. No audience. Just movement, breath, and thought. He replayed the fight again, not to glorify it, but to dissect it. Where he had accelerated. Where he had almost gone too far. Where intention had sharpened into something heavier. He knew most people believed the moment of danger was when fists flew. They were wrong. The danger was earlier, when a man decided why he was striking. Bruce had crossed that threshold briefly. He had felt it, and stepping back from it had taken more discipline than stepping into it ever would. That realization stayed with him. In interviews, when people pressed him about power, about effectiveness, about who would win in a real fight, Bruce deflected. He talked about movement, about expression, about personal truth. Some listeners were disappointed. They wanted violence. They wanted certainty. Bruce gave them philosophy instead. But privately, he adjusted his teaching. He spoke more often about responsibility, about the cost of skill, about how mastery didn't excuse action, it demanded restraint. Students who stayed learned that what he was offering wasn't a way to dominate others, but a way to govern oneself. The story from Hong Kong resurfaced occasionally, usually distorted. Each retelling made him more ruthless, more unstoppable, more dangerous. Bruce never corrected them. Legends, he believed, revealed more about the people who told them than the man they described. Still, on certain nights, he wondered what might have happened if he hadn't stopped. If the referee had been slower. If he had chosen expression over control. The answer unsettled him. Not because of what he could have done, but because of how easily he could have justified it. That awareness became a quiet weight he carried forward. Invisible, constant, and it shaped everything that came after. Years later, people would still argue about that night. They would debate technique, timing, size, rules. They would argue about whether it was exaggerated, misunderstood, or entirely symbolic. Some would claim it never happened the way it was told. Others would swear it was proof of something deeper. Bruce Lee let them. Because what mattered to him had nothing to do with the ring. What stayed with him wasn't the sound of the crowd, or the stoppage, or even the insult that had sparked it all. It was the moment just before the final exchange. The instant when he had felt the full weight of his ability and realized what it could do if left unchecked. That awareness became part of him. In his training, in his teaching, in the way he spoke about combat as expression rather than destruction. He knew that true danger didn't come from lack of skill. It came from skill paired with justification. From the belief that being able to do something meant you should. The fight in Hong Kong had shown him how thin the boundary really was, and how easy it was to cross. So he built his philosophy around that line, around flexibility, awareness, and restraint. Around the idea that the highest level of mastery wasn't domination but choice. When people asked him who would win in a real fight, he smiled and changed the subject. When they pressed him about power, he talked about balance. When they wanted spectacle, he gave them silence. Because he had already learned the answer. That night in the ring wasn't about proving strength. It was about recognizing responsibility. And that, more than any punch or victory, was the lesson Bruce Lee carried forward. Quietly, deliberately, and without apology. The crowd eventually forgot the details, but Bruce never forgot the decision. And in the end, that decision defined him far more than the fight ever could.